Now, last Friday night in the quarter-final of the Champions League, something quite shocking and remarkable happened. Bayern Munich beat Barcelona 8-2 in the quarter-final, and it was the worst defeat Barcelona have experienced going back to the 50s or maybe even to the 40s, but my next guest will tell us about that. That's Richard Fitzpatrick. This is huge. It's more than football. Barcelona are more than a football club. It's a revered institution in Catalonia, and in fact, although the Camp Nou where they now play was built in the 50s, 57 I think, the stadium where they played was one of the few places where people could, in the Franco years of fascism, where they could speak their own language, the Catalan language, and indeed sometimes chant anti-Franco slogans. It's a loved institution in Catalonia, and we're joined now, as I say, by Richard Fitzpatrick, an Irishman who lives there and works as a journalist. Richard, it would be difficult to overstate the importance of Barcelona Football Club to the Catalan people, wouldn't it?
It's a massive part of their identity and their heritage. I mean, it's the big cultural institution they have. Everybody refers to it. It's an absolutely football mad city, but on top of that, you have this Catalan separatist aspect to the mix. So even, for example, last year before the coronavirus hit, the Catalan independence movement had been gaining force. There had been rioting at the airport back in October. They had to reschedule the Clásico, which was due to be played on October 26th, to December. When that game went ahead, there was rioting outside the stadium. One of the gates was damaged. Fans tried to stampede one of the entrances into the stadium. There was huge bonfires. You could smell the smoke inside in the stadium towards the end of the game from the bonfires that had been lit outside the stadium, and rioting went on for an hour or two after the game. It's integral to their sense of being this football club. So on a world stage, to suffer a defeat so humiliating as the one that happened last Friday was inexcusable, insufferable for the fans. I mean, we spoke, Eamon, last year after the defeat to Liverpool at Anfield,
yes,
the 4-0 defeat, and that was so embarrassing for so many reasons. The fact that they had squandered a 3-0 lead, the Keystone Cops defending at that corner kick by Trent Alexander-Arnold,
yes,
in a semi-final like this. But this is 8 goals they've just shipped to Bayern Munich. People's heads are hanging low at the moment. There's problems all over the club now at an institutional level, and to do with the composition of the squad. It even extends to the issue of what to do with Messi.
Yes.
So there's deep problems here, and it's really embarrassing for the Catalans.
Yes, there are a number of things to talk about. One of them being that it seems like Ronald Koeman, a former Barca player, currently managing the Netherlands, and a successful manager with the Netherlands and elsewhere, may be going back. It's also true that there have been media reports that Lionel Messi has threatened to leave. It's also true, Richard, that in 2013, Barcelona lost 7-0 to Bayern, but it was over 2 legs in the Champions League semi-final. But the 8-2 was such a humiliation, and as you point out, coming after the 4-0 humiliation at Anfield last year, it suggests an ageing team and serious problems. Let's talk first about, before we get to Ronald Koeman, the situation with Lionel Messi. I mean, you've explained to us before that because of his stature as a player and as a person, really, he is, although not seeking to be, a leader and somebody that's looked to for leadership when the club has a crisis. It isn't the role he seeks. It's not in his kind of DNA. That would be fair to say, wouldn't it?
Definitely, yeah. He's an introvert by nature. His situation now is possibly the most worrying aspect in a long list for Barca fans. There was reports that came out on Sunday, I think it was by a really well-connected Brazilian journalist, Marcelo Belcher. He was the guy who broke the Neymar transfer story back in 2017 to PSG, and everybody was laughing at him when he leaked the story, including club directors, one infamously who said that Neymar was 200% staying at the club, and he left packed his bags a week or two later. So he is saying, this journalist is saying that Messi has told the club that he wants to leave this summer. We've spoken before on the podcast about his position at the club, his contract. There was a clause in it that allowed him to go to leave the club for free at the end of this season, which was technically June 30th. But once that date passed, he automatically renewed for another year. So he has a contract until 2021. But what this journalist is saying is that Messi wants to leave now. Now, things have changed a small bit since then. That was Sunday. The board have met and they've decided to bring forward presidential elections. Listeners may or may not know that Barca is a club run by its members, and its president is elected every 6 years.
And by members, you mean fans? I mean, the fans have power, real power.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's a great model for the club. Real Madrid are run along the same lines, and Athletic Bilbao. The German clubs, they're 51% fan owned. So the fans run the club essentially.
Yes.
But the flip side is that it makes for a very fragile political environment. There's always sniping going on, always pretenders to the throne. So it makes it really, really fragile political environment. So what this incumbent president has done is his mandate will run out at the end of next March now, when these elections have been brought forward. Until then, but what the kind of piece or the olive branch it is to Messi, or what it represents for Messi, is that he won't have to renew his contract, which has been a big elephant in the room at the club. He won't have to renew that contract with the incumbent. He can wait until next March, and after the election, if as people or the diehard fans at the club are hoping, a new president will come in. The front runner is a guy called Victor Font, a businessman who has been based in the Middle East. He's a Catalan guy, and on his ticket he has Xavi Hernandez as his new coach, and he also has connections with Pep Guardiola, which are a bit kind of more in the long term, that Pep Guardiola would return as a kind of head of the youth academy. But that Xavi Hernandez, he is seen as the white in shining armour that would come to save the situation. But look, the problems are very deep-seated. So we don't know what's going to happen with Messi. We have this noise coming from his camp that he's unhappy, talking about leaving. He's on holidays now. It would be difficult to get a deal done for him. Like, there are only a handful of clubs that will have the money. Working out the finances of it would be very difficult. He would obviously command a big transfer fee, even though he's 33. Last week there were reports that Inter Milan had tabled a bid. They were going to wait until next year, until his contract ends and he could go on a free transfer. They'd pay 260 million over 5 years. But so I would watch that space over the next month or two. The transfer window finishes on October 5th, I think. So let's see what happens.
I saw Inter Milan last night. They did beat their opponents 5-0. But the opponents, Shakhtar Donetsk, weren't very good. It was in the semi-final of the Europa League. I'm sure you know the result. Ashley Young was playing, but they're not really a team, I think, that could accommodate Messi. He's too good. But there is an obvious problem if you look at the squad, Richard, and its age. I mean, Messi is 33, and of course he is remarkable and still remarkable. But others like Piqué, Suarez. Suarez is also 33. Piqué is 2. Sergio Busquets, 32. Jordi Alba, who's a very good left back, 31. So age is a real issue, isn't it? And particularly in key positions. I mean, in defensive midfield, in key positions, and of course with Luis Suarez up front, it really means that they're going to have to. And the La Masia, which is their academy, which produced so many of these great players, Xavi, Iniesta, isn't producing great players anymore. So there's a large check that needs to be written, and we'd have to wonder if they have the money, because, I mean, they spent a lot of money trying to refresh the team. Antoine Griezmann cost 120 million euros last summer. He didn't start against Bayern Munich. Dembele cost 100 million euros plus. He sat the whole game out on the bench. Philippe Coutinho, who cost 150 million euros from Liverpool, came off the bench for Bayern last week, where he's on loan, and scored 2 goals. So they have wasted a lot of money. How much have they got? Have they got the resources to rebuild this club?
Yeah, it's particularly the Coutinho one is very embarrassing. He stands to cost the club a 5 million bonus that will be paid to Liverpool if he wins the Champions League this year with Bayern Munich. There was a clause in one of the variables was that they didn't specify which club he had to win the Champions League.
No, and they're going to win it.
Yeah, it looks like it. The age profile, that's a huge problem. You mentioned earlier about that heavy 7-0 aggregate defeat to Bayern Munich back in 2013. The club was in there were elements of a similar crisis in 2014, 12 months after that embarrassing Champions League defeat to Bayern. They had just finished that following season. They'd won no major trophies. The club was screaming for an overhaul. These guys had been on the road a long time at this stage. So they went out to the market. They threw money at the problem. They got Luis Suarez, who's already in space of 6 years is the 3rd highest goal scorer in Barca's history. He's been a huge success. They bought Ter Stegen, the goalkeeper. They bought Ivan Rakitic, who was the best player probably in La Liga that season, from Sevilla, and he came in, slotted into the team, kept Xavi out of the team. Xavi was used as a number 12 that season, and they ended up winning a triple. But the thing was, one of the things was they obviously had that money to spend, and they also, the age profile, yes, those guys had miles on the clock, Piqué, Busquets, Messi, Alba, but they were only 26, 27. And even Iniesta at the time was 30, but they got another 4 years out of him. So he was still at the top of his game. He was captain in that triple winning season. But the money is the problem around this time. They have a huge overhaul to make on the squad. But they're really scrambling. You mentioned those 3 expensive signings over the last couple of years, Coutinho, Dembele and Griezmann. The press were roaring about this at the weekend. 350 million on the bench. They haven't succeeded in replenishing this squad, even when they have had money. And now with the coronavirus, they're already down. The president said a week or two ago, 200 million from the season that is just finished. That excludes the bonus money they would have got for proceeding in the Champions League, another 30 or 40 million. Next season, he's saying they'll be down 30%. That's an optimistic enough scenario.
Yes.
Valencia during the week, their general manager said that club will be down 50% of their revenue next season. The football industry it's in a bit of a denial about this, particularly in Spain. The impact that this coronavirus is going to have on the income of these big clubs.
Yes, because they don't. Fans. It's worth pointing out they don't have the television money that the Premier League clubs have, and it's shared on a pro rata basis depending on how well you do. But the bottom club in the Premier League gets 150 million, whereas in Spain, as I understand it, Real Madrid and Barcelona, who feature every week anyway, they keep their own money. Is that right?
No, they that was the system until about 5 years ago, and they adjusted it. They even brought in a law in the country to make the system more equitable. But
good.
the share of the pie is still weighted towards Barca
Yes.
and Madrid, and those smaller clubs live on beans, compared to the likes of the English Premier League clubs in the bottom half of the table. But Barca won't have that income next season. They're already really struggling to balance the books. One of these things that the board met yesterday to decide on a few measures, like the coach, but one of the issues was this election. The fans wanted an election immediately, but what they agreed to was to bring it forward a few months to March, and this March date is important. The reason that chose March was because they can get in the two transfer windows this summer and in January to try and balance the books, because the outgoing board will be on the hook for any discrepancy in the debt that the club is carrying. So those guys want to sell, and it's a really difficult market now. Like we say, there's no guarantee. You spend 350 million on Dembélé and Griezmann and Coutinho. That doesn't work. They'll go and they'll try and sell all those old players who are on. Some of them are on crazy deals. Like Alba renewed his contract last season. He's on a deal until 2024. Busquets the same, 2023. Busquets, Vidal, Dembélé, Rakitic, they're all on 10 million net. Yes. Big salaries. We've seen this across Europe. The big clubs can't get rid of these expensive old players.
Yes.
Ozil at Arsenal, Bale and James at Real Madrid. So that's the problem Barca will have now. They have academy players coming through. A couple of interesting ones. Ricky Puig, kind of like an Iniesta in midfield, very exciting player, and Ansu Fati, a 17-year-old forward. But they're still young guys. We don't know, like they say in Spain, it's like the melon. Until we open the melon, we don't know what it will be like.
One of the melons we do know what it's like is Ronald Koeman. Ronald Koeman, very respected, outstanding player for Barcelona, and had an outstanding career as a coach as well, and has done wonders with the team he has at the moment. The Netherlands, I understand he's resigned and given notice to the Netherlands, and also that he is going to be the new coach, and that it's official. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you're ahead of me there, Eamon. I didn't know he'd handed in his notice, but yep. The reports were this morning that in the press that he was seeking that. He's a shoo-in. He'll be unveiled either tomorrow or Thursday.
And when you have an aging squad, but an experienced squad, and you don't have the resources required to go and buy the best, as they've been able to do for almost a generation now, the experience of Koeman will be important.
Yeah, it's an interesting appointment. Like you mentioned there at the outset about the Catalan identity, and
yes.
It feeds into his selection actually as coach, because over the weekend the front runner and the president's choice and the sporting director's choice, Eric Abidal, was Mauricio Pochettino. He lives in the city. He's a good friend with the president. Their kids go to the same school. But he had bloodied his copybook in trying to distance himself from rumours that he was going to join Barca. This was a year or two ago when he was Spurs coach. He said that he'd rather work on a farm back in Argentina than manage Barca, because he's an ex-Espanyol player and manager. Yeah. It was a throwaway remark.
Espanyol being the second team in the city, for those who don't know that.
Exactly. So it was a throwaway remark, but the people here are so sensitive about those kind of issues. And yes. When it came to it, half the board, or a lot of board members, object to Pochettino's appointment, because they said the fans would go crazy over it, over a kind of identity issue like this. It seems there are bigger issues at play. Pochettino had a lot to recommend himself to his appointment. He's worked in building building a team with young players. His trajectory is very good. You know, he did very well at Southampton, then at Spurs, better again. He's a modern coach. Ronald Koeman is a bit, you know, his managerial CV is a bit like the curate's egg. It's good in parts. He's been around the block. Now, he has done very well in places. He's won league titles in Holland. He did a good job as national team coach with Holland. He did well at Southampton, but he also has some big black stains. He was run out of Valencia here. They were in the 2 points from the relegation zone when he was sacked.
That's something he shares with Gary Neville, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, he lasted a bit longer than him, but it wasn't quite as bad as Neville.
No, ignominious, I think, in Gary Neville's case.
Yeah. Oh, that was a huge mess. And at Everton again, they were in the relegation zone when he was sacked. So he's been mentioned going back to 2003, whenever the managerial appointment becomes vacant at Barca. He does have things going for him. One of those things was the reason the board liked him was because the fans will rally around him. He's an absolute legend in the club because of his performances, over 100 goals from defence during his career here, but specifically this famous goal at Wembley in '92, which delivered their first European Cup. He's a very charismatic guy, big presence. This would you imagine will help him in a big club, because it's very strange what's happening now with these big clubs, that they're appointing these figures like Zidane, the famous ex-players. Juventus, it seems like a huge punt. They've gone in with Pirlo now, but Koeman comes into that category, that he can manage the big egos, you would hope. But let's see.
Tell me about the Presidente. Bartomeu, is that the correct way? Yeah. He has done some extraordinary things over the last 12 months, including, we think, hiring a PR company, essentially, or a posh idea of a PR company, to get involved in social media, criticising Messi and other people in the club, and doing it at the bidding of the president. Is that true? And if it's true, how come he can even get in the ground?
Yeah, I think it's pointed that you mentioned getting into the ground. This is one of the things he has in his favour, is the Camp Nou Stadium is shut now, so it's going to be a long time until next March, until this election. Normally, I wouldn't see him surviving until for that length of time, particularly obviously if results go bad next season.
What's his background, Richard?
He's a businessman. He heads up a kind of engineering firm that does construction work in the airspace kind of that industry. He's a Catalan, like all these appointments. He is one of the big problems in the club is there's been a civil war institutionally going back to the time Cruyff was manager in the 90s, between Cruyffistas. This would be the likes of Pep Guardiola would be in that camp, Javi Hernandez. They would be very romantic figures in Catalonia. They'd be into this kind of tiki-taka football, and then and very pro-Catalan, very Catalan separatist in their ideology. And then you would have the other half of the house, which are more hard-nosed business people. The president who Cruyff despised was a guy called Nunez. He was in power from 1978 to 2000, a huge patriarchal figure. Did a lot of things in building up the club, but was disliked by the more romantic of the fan base. But his successor, Bartomeu, would be one of his in the line. So, for example, with Pep Guardiola, it's a dream for Barca fans, or a lot of them, that Pep Guardiola would come back to the club in some capacity.
Might be a dream for Manchester City fans now.
Yeah, at this stage. Too true.
Sorry, Pep.
Yeah, but he would help in this regeneration. But he would have a toxic relationship with the likes of Bartomeu and his successor, his predecessor, who spent 2 years in prison for a money laundering investigation, Sandro Rosell. Sandro Rosell and his board used to call, and this was when Guardiola was the head coach at Barca, they used to call him the Dalai Lama, dismissively. Oh, we have to wait to hear what the Dalai Lama says, making fun of him behind his back.
Of course, it in a serious point, should point out that Guardiola is and was very vocal in the recent Catalan independence movement, and is a strong supporter of that movement.
Yeah, and that would be a big part of that animosity towards him. Not all the Barca fan base are pro-Catalan independence. This other regime, the current regime, would be more pluralist. They would be just get business done and don't be distracting ourselves with politics. Let's just make business and get on with it. So they don't have that ideology or the philosophy that the Peps or the Javi Hernandez and those guys would have.
Now, Richard, just finally, if you look at the history of European football, this is one of the greatest clubs. There's no question about it. And in the last 20 years, they've given us so much. If you look at the list of players like Griezmann, Dembele, Philippe Coutinho, who weren't in the starting 11 last week, and you look at Lionel Messi, of course, they really have to rebuild, but they don't have the money to rebuild. The good news might be that Real Madrid are awful at the moment.
Yeah.
And they were moithered by a bad Manchester City team, a really bad Manchester City team. And Real Madrid beat themselves really with Varane's performance. What happens now? Ronald Koeman comes in. My best guess would be he'll try to rehabilitate Griezmann, Dembele, Coutinho, use the best players he's got. There is a suggestion, and I want to ask you about this finally, that Messi is a problem in that he has too much influence and that his mates have to play and be favoured, and that would be Busquets and Piqué, and of course Suarez, he's very close to. I think that's... Well, what do you think of that? Is it true?
Yeah. Go on.
It is true.
Yeah, it is. For the first time, this question has been tabled seriously now. Should the club bite the bullet and move him on? It's been asked theoretically. There are a few problems. Yes, there, like you mentioned, he does have this overwhelming presence in the dressing room, just by dint of he's so exceptional. If his buddies would get a free ride a bit, Luis Suarez, Jordi Alba, Busquets to a lesser extent. Yes. So there is an element of that, and there's also the sense that other players diminish in his presence.
Yes.
Frankie de Jong has been played out of position this season, but you get that sense with him. He's spoken, about how he always looks for Messi whenever he gets the ball. Antoine Griezmann as well, there would be an element to that in his case. But the problem is, and you can look, there is a very useful reference point here in the situation with Cristiano Ronaldo, two very similar figures in their impact on the game and their presence at both those big clubs. Cristiano Ronaldo previously with Real Madrid. Real Madrid got rid of him, and like you say, they've been a mess. Yes, they scrambled their way to league title this season, but the guys who came in to replace him, Eden Hazard, I know it's through injury, but 1 goal this season. Luka Jovic, who has been pound for pound the biggest flop in Real Madrid's history, 2 goals for 60 million. There's several issues with his off the field behaviour, and it's the problem with these younger guys that you bring in, like those guys. Dembele haven't worked out at the club, or Coutinho wilted under the pressure. Lautaro Martinez is a hot target for Barca at the moment, that they would bring him.
Scored last night. Yes.
Yeah, 2 goals exactly.
Yes.
But really, you don't know until this guy comes, because the pressure is so intense at this club. And if you're asking the guy to be Messi's successor, can you imagine how much that would weigh on him?
Yep.
So that's a big problem. And then the other factor is, and this doesn't apply with Ronaldo. When Ronaldo left, nobody hardly said boo at the club, because the club is run by a dominant president. He's like a czar at that place.
Yes.
He rules the roost, and
yes.
The club was always going to be bigger than Ronaldo, but that situation is different in Barcelona because of the connection Messi has with the club. 20 years he's been here in the city. They just absolutely idolise him. So there's going to be huge psychic shock whenever he does walk away. There will be recriminations, like there was when Figo was let go, when he was filched by Real Madrid in 2000. That led to 5-year trophyless spin. So you'll have those big emotional problems whenever Messi does leave the club, and that will hamper whatever kind of renovation happens, any kind of succession plans.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much for telling us the story, I think, of a club that is in meltdown, a great club. Doubtless they'll come back, but there may well be more bad moments before it happens. Richard Fitzpatrick in Barcelona, we're very grateful to you for joining us.